The GPS led you here. The paycheck is real. But the exit doors just vanished, and the mannequins are breathing. You notice it at 2:47 a.m. Not a sound, not a shadow, something worse, a stillness that isn't right. You're standing at the intersection of the east and west wings, flashlight cutting a pale beam across the polished floor, and the mall stretches in both directions for what feels like half a mile. You've walked this corridor 6 times tonight. You know the layout. You memorized it on your first shift. Food court to the north, anchor department store to the south, 12 boutique shops on each side, emergency exits at both ends. But the exit sign to the south, the one with the little green man running, is gone. Not broken. Not burned out. Gone. The wall where it hung is smooth, uninterrupted, as if the door behind it was never there. You tell yourself it's fatigue. You tell yourself you miscounted the corridors. You walk south anyway, boots squeaking on the marble, and the flashlight catches the first mannequin through the glass of a women's clothing boutique. It's posed mid-stride, one arm extended, chin tilted slightly upward. Except the chin was tilted downward an hour ago. You remember, because you thought it looked sad. Now it is looking directly at you. Your radio crackles. Nothing comes through. Just static. And beneath the static, if you listen carefully, something rhythmic, something slow, something like breathing. You stand there at 2:47 a.m. in a building your employment contract described as Westfield Crescent Shopping Center, Level 3 Security Patrol, and you reach for your phone to call your supervisor. The number no longer exists in your contacts. It was there when your shift started. You know without being able to explain how you know that it has always been gone. But let's go back to the beginning of your shift, and further back than that. Back to the moment you first saw the job posting and why you were desperate enough to take it. 3 weeks ago, you were sitting in a fluorescent-lit unemployment office filling out your 14th job application in 30 days. The economy had done what economies do when the people running them stop pretending to care. Layoffs, restructuring, a polite email from HR that used the phrase position elimination as though your livelihood had simply ceased to exist through natural processes like erosion. You had rent due in 11 days. You had a car payment. You had a mother in a care facility whose fees were not covered by anything except your continued employment. The job posting appeared on a Thursday evening at 9:14 p.m. Night security, Westfield Crescent Shopping Center. Immediate start, competitive pay, no experience necessary, uniform provided, flexible scheduling. The hourly rate was 40% higher than anything else in the listings. There was a number to call and a name, Mr. Harlan, Facilities Director. You called it the next morning. Mr. Harlan answered on the first ring, as though he had been waiting. His voice was warm, professional, unhurried. He described the role in precise, reassuring detail. 3 overnight shifts per week, patrol routes clearly marked on a laminated floor plan provided at orientation, emergency protocols binder. Fully operational CCTV system monitored from a staffed security hub in the building's lower level. Everything he said was plausible. Everything he said was specific enough to feel true. You asked when you could start. He said, "The building is ready for you." Not we, the building. You didn't notice that at the time. Orientation was the following Monday. The building was real. You drove to it. You parked in an underground lot with working lights and painted parking bays. You took an elevator to the ground floor and met Mr. Harlan in person, a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, immaculately dressed, with the kind of handshake that comes from decades of deliberate practice. He walked you through the mall. It was closed for a private renovation period, he explained. All retail tenants temporarily relocated. The building would reopen in 6 to 8 weeks. Your job was simply to be present overnight. Deter opportunistic entry. Log anything unusual. The mall was beautiful, freshly cleaned, silent but not eerily so, just the silence of a large space between its active hours. You walked the patrol route. You found the security hub in the lower level, 4 monitors, a desk, a kettle, a small fridge with your name on a piece of tape. Your name, already on the fridge, before you'd accepted the job. You didn't notice that either. Your first shift passed without incident. Your second shift passed without incident. You walked the route, drank your coffee, logged your reports in a binder that Mr. Harlan collected each morning when he arrived at 6 a.m. precisely. He always arrived before you left. He was always already there when the elevator opened. You never saw him park. You never saw him enter. By the end of the second week, you had stopped noticing. The mall had a logic to it. Once you learned it, it felt natural, comfortable, even. The way any repeated environment becomes familiar. The particular echo your boots made on the East Wing marble versus the slightly softer resonance of the West Wing carpet. The way the overhead fluorescents in the food court buzzed at a frequency slightly different from the rest of the building. The 2-second delay on the motion sensors near the anchor store entrance. You knew this building the way you know a face. There were 7 mannequins in the women's boutique, 3 in the men's outfitter, 1 in the toy shop window, a child-sized figure in a school uniform, arms at its sides, glass eyes forward. The patrol route was a figure 8. Ground floor first, then up the central escalator which ran continuously despite the building being closed, which you had stopped finding odd, then the upper level, then back down, then the lower level past the security hub, then back up, full circuit, 42 minutes. You had timed it precisely. Mr. Harlan reviewed your logs each morning with the attentiveness of a man who already knew what they contained. "Everything satisfactory?" he would ask. "Everything satisfactory," you would confirm. He would nod, he would take the binder, he would smile, with his mouth only. There was a door on the lower level that was not on your floor plan. It appeared in your 3rd week. Or perhaps it had always been there, and you had simply begun to see it. It was set into the wall beside the maintenance corridor, painted the same shade of institutional gray as everything around it, with no handle on your side and no visible hinges. There was no label, no sign, no indication of what lay beyond it. The first time you asked Mr. Harlan about it, he said, "Supply access, nothing you need to concern yourself with." The second time you asked, he said the same words, in the same order, at the same pace, not as though he was remembering his answer, as though he was playing it back. You wrote it in the log. The next morning, the log entry was gone, not crossed out, not removed. The page was intact and continuous, your handwriting flowing uninterrupted from the entry before to the entry after, as though you had never written it. You checked your pen. The ink was real. The first revelation came on a Tuesday at 1:20 a.m. You were completing your upper-level circuit when you noticed that the directory board, the large illuminated map of the mall near the central escalator, listed 17 retail units. You had counted 12 on your first night, 12 boutiques. You had walked past 12 doors. You had a laminated floor plan showing 12 units. The directory listed 17. You stood in front of it for a long time. You counted the names, 17 distinct retailers. You walked the upper level again, counting doors, 12. You came back to the directory, 17. 5 stores existed on the map that did not exist in the corridor. Or 5 stores existed in a part of the building you had not accessed. You went back to the lower level and looked at the gray door. The second revelation came 4 nights later. You had begun taking photographs on your phone during patrols, a private log, independent of the official binder. You photographed the directory board. You photographed the corridor. You photographed the mannequins in each window. On the 5th night, you reviewed the photographs from the night before. The mannequins were in different positions, not dramatically, not obviously. A hand, slightly lower, a foot shifted, a head tilted a degree or two in a different direction. Small enough that you might dismiss it as your memory misremembering, except you had photographs. Sequential photographs, taken 1 hour apart. The mannequin in the women's boutique that had been facing the window at midnight was, by 2 a.m., facing the interior of the shop, away from the glass, as though it had turned to look at something inside. You searched for Westfield Crescent Shopping Center that night in the security hub on the desktop computer Mr. Harlan had told you was for administrative use only. The computer had internet access. You typed the mall's name into a search engine. No results. You searched for the address on the building's letterhead. The street existed. The postcode existed. The satellite image showed a large commercial building at the correct coordinates. But the building in the image was derelict. Roof partially collapsed, windows boarded or broken, weeds growing through the car park surface. The image was time-stamped 18 months ago. You were sitting inside this building right now. The third revelation did not come as information. It came as sound. At 3:03 a.m. on your 15th shift, walking the East Wing ground floor, you heard footsteps above you. Measured, deliberate footsteps, crossing the upper level in the exact pattern of your own patrol route. Your exact route, your exact pace, as though someone was walking your circuit simultaneously, one floor up. You took the escalator to the upper level. It was empty, but the footsteps were now below you. You called the number for Mr. Harlan from a payphone outside a petrol station at 6 a.m. You had started leaving immediately after your shifts without waiting for him to arrive. The number rang. He answered. You told him what you had found. The derelict building in the satellite image. The 5 missing stores. The mannequins. His voice didn't change. Not a single modulation. You're doing very well, he said. Everything is satisfactory. You hung up. You drove to the building in daylight. The car park was immaculate. The exterior looked recently maintained. You went to the front entrance. The doors were locked. You pressed your face to the glass. Inside was dark. Not closed dark. The lights off. The escalator still. And from where you were standing, you could see the East Wing corridor stretching away into the interior. There was a figure at the far end, standing still. You couldn't make out the face, but it was the height and build of a person, and it was not moving, and it was facing the entrance. Facing you. You got back in your car and drove to the unemployment office and asked the caseworker at the front desk to pull up the job posting for Westfield Crescent. She searched the database. There was no posting for Westfield Crescent in the last 90 days. She searched the building name. No matches in the local commercial property register. She suggested perhaps it was handled through a third-party recruitment agency. You had been receiving paychecks, real paychecks, deposited into your actual bank account every Friday from a company called Harlan Property Management Limited. You called your bank. The deposits were real. The company registration number on the paychecks was real. You looked it up. Harlan Property Management Limited was registered at an address in the city center. You drove to the address. It was a closed-down estate agency, empty, windows soaped over, lease notice on the door. The lease termination was dated 4 years ago. You had paychecks from a company that had ceased to exist 4 years before you were hired by it. Your phone rang. Mr. Harlan. You didn't answer. You drove home. You sat in your kitchen and did not sleep. At 10 p.m., your phone showed a notification. Your next shift started in 2 hours. You went. You told yourself it was the last time. One more shift. You'd collect whatever evidence you could video on your phone, photographs, timestamps, everything, and then you'd go to the police, or a journalist, or anyone who would listen. Maybe there was a rational explanation. Maybe it was a social experiment. Maybe Mr. Harlan was eccentric, but legitimate. Maybe the satellite image was outdated, and the building had since been renovated, and the company registration was an administrative error. You went in with a plan. Eyes open, phone recording continuously. You would document everything and leave at 4 a.m., 2 hours before Mr. Harlan's arrival, with footage that could explain itself without you having to. For 4 hours, nothing happened. The building was exactly as it always was, clean, empty, still. The patrol route took its 42 minutes. The mannequins were in their positions. The exit signs were present and illuminated. The gray door on the lower level was closed. You began to feel foolish. At 3:55 a.m., you were in the food court finishing your coffee, 5 minutes from your planned exit. thinking about how you'd explain your paranoia to yourself in the morning, thinking about your mother's care fees and your rent and how easily fear can manufacture conspiracy from coincidence. The escalator stopped. Not gradually, not with a mechanical wind down. One moment it was running, the next it was not. And the lights, not all of them, not dramatically, but the lights at the far end of every corridor went out simultaneously, as though the building had exhaled. You stood up. The exit to the food court service corridor, the one you had identified on your second night as your fastest route to the parking structure, was gone. Not locked. The wall was smooth. You ran to the east wing exit. Smooth wall. West wing. Smooth wall. Main entrance. North side. Smooth wall. The building had no exits. It had never had exits. You understood this now, not as new information, but as the lifting of a deliberate blindness. You had seen this every night. You had walked past it every night. The building had always been showing you, and you had been too comfortable, too grateful for the paycheck, too afraid of unemployment to let yourself see what the building was. It wasn't that the exits vanished. You had simply stopped being allowed to pretend they were there. You heard the breathing then, not from the mannequin specifically, from everywhere, the gentle, patient respiration of something very large that has been waiting a long time and does not need to rush. Your phone still had battery. The camera was still recording. You looked at the footage. Mr. Harlan appeared in every corridor, every hour, standing at the far end of the frame, present in footage you had taken while alone, visible in the background of shots you had taken of the directory board, the gray door, the mannequins. Always in the background, always still, always watching. In the most recent clip, the food court, 40 seconds ago, he was standing directly behind you. You turned around. The food court was empty. Here is what no one tells you about the places between places, the buildings that exist in the gap between the map and the territory, the jobs that pay from accounts that predate their own company, the employers who know your name before you've given it. They are not hunting you. They never needed to hunt. They simply posted a job during a recession at a rate 40% above market with immediate start. And they waited. And you came. And the exit was never there. And somewhere, right now, the posting is live again. A different city, a different name, the same rate, the same detail, the same warm, professional, unhurried voice on the first ring. And someone, tonight, is on their 14th job application in 30 days. This has been a work of original liminal fiction, a story exploring the psychological architecture of financial desperation, the way economic precarity makes us willingly blind to what we would otherwise see clearly, and the very human tendency to normalize the uncanny when the alternative is unemployment. But the building isn't entirely fictional. Liminal spaces, the empty mall after closing, the airport at 4 a.m., the school corridor in summer are real psychological phenomena. Researchers in environmental psychology have documented the specific unease these spaces produce, a location that exists outside its intended time, stripped of the human activity that gives it meaning, becoming something the brain cannot quite categorize. Here's the question I want you to answer below. At what exact moment in this story did you stop believing in a rational explanation? Was it the satellite image showing a derelict building, the paychecks from a company that closed 4 years ago, or the footage of Mr. Harlan standing behind you? Tell me in the comments. And if this corridor felt familiar, if you've ever taken a job because you were desperate enough not to ask the questions you should have asked, subscribe. New stories drop every week. The exit is this way. Probably.